Have you ever experienced a moment so strange, so perfectly timed, that it made you wonder whether the universe was trying to tell you something? Perhaps you've noticed repeating numbers appearing everywhere you look. Perhaps your dreams have become unusually vivid. Maybe you've begun questioning the life you've always accepted as normal, sensing that something deeper is quietly calling your name. If any of this feels familiar, then stay with me, because today's message is unlike anything we've shared before. This is not a prediction. It is not a promise. It is not something you are expected to believe without question. Instead, think of it as a symbolic transmission, an imaginative Arcturian-inspired story designed to encourage reflection, self-discovery, and inner awareness. But here's what makes today different. Some opportunities for personal transformation only become visible when we are truly ready to notice them. Ignore them, and life often continues exactly as before. Pay attention, and you may discover a completely new way of understanding yourself. Only a very small number of people will watch this message from beginning to end. Not because it's hidden, but because most people are too distracted to sit quietly with themselves long enough to hear what their own intuition has been trying to say. If you're still here, perhaps this story arrived at exactly the right moment. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and join thousands of seekers across the United States, the United Kingdom, and around the world who enjoy thoughtful explorations of starseed mythology, spiritual symbolism, higher consciousness, and personal growth. Every week we share inspiring journeys designed to encourage reflection, curiosity, and hope. Now, take one slow breath, quiet the noise around you, and imagine that somewhere beyond the stars, a timeless civilization known in legend as the Arcturians has chosen to share a symbolic message. Not to predict your future, but to remind you of the power that has always existed within you. Because today's story begins with a single question. What if the opportunity you've been waiting for has already arrived, and your greatest challenge is simply recognizing it before it quietly passes by? There are moments in every human life that appear completely ordinary until much later, when we realize they quietly divided our story into two separate chapters. Before that moment, we believed we understood who we were. After it, nothing ever looked the same again. According to Arcturian-inspired traditions, every awakening begins this way, not with dramatic lights in the sky or impossible miracles, but with subtle shifts in awareness that are so easy to dismiss that most people never notice them at all. Imagine waking one morning with the unmistakable feeling that something has changed. Even though everything around you appears exactly as it did yesterday. The sunlight enters through the same window. The streets outside sound the same. Your responsibilities remain unchanged. Yet deep inside, there is a quiet sensation that refuses to disappear. It isn't fear. It isn't excitement. It feels more like remembering something you cannot quite place. You carry this feeling throughout the day, unable to explain it to anyone, because there are simply no words for what you're experiencing. In symbolic Arcturian teachings, this is sometimes described as the returning signal. It is not believed to come from somewhere outside of you, but from the deeper parts of your own consciousness that have remained silent beneath years of routine, distraction, and self-doubt. It begins not as a voice, but as a question. Why does life suddenly feel different? Why do certain conversations no longer satisfy you? Why do old habits seem strangely empty? Why do places that once felt familiar suddenly feel too small for the person you're becoming? At first, many people resist these questions. They convince themselves that nothing unusual is happening. They distract themselves with endless scrolling, constant entertainment, and busy schedules. They tell themselves they'll think about it tomorrow. Then tomorrow becomes next week. Next week becomes next year. Eventually, the signal grows so quiet beneath the noise that they forget it was ever there. But every so often, someone chooses differently. Imagine that person as you. You begin noticing patterns that previously escaped your attention. The same meaningful phrase appears in different books, written by different authors. You hear the same piece of advice from strangers who have never met each other. You wake repeatedly at the same time during the night, not frightened, but strangely peaceful. Familiar songs suddenly carry meanings you've never heard before. Conversations seem to answer questions you never spoke aloud. Whether viewed as coincidence, psychology, or spiritual symbolism, these experiences invite reflection. They encourage you to slow down long enough to notice your own thoughts, feelings, and aspirations. The important point is not proving that they come from an external source. The important point is recognizing that they inspire you to look inward. The symbolic Arcturian story says that every soul eventually reaches a crossroads invisible to everyone else. One path leads back toward comfort, certainty, and familiar routines. The other leads toward uncertainty, curiosity, and growth. Neither path is forced upon anyone. The choice always remains deeply personal. But there is one detail these stories emphasize again and again. The doorway never stays open forever. Not because some mysterious force closes it, but because opportunities for growth often fade when we continually ignore them. Habits become stronger. Fear becomes more convincing. The excuses become easier to believe. The longer we postpone listening to ourselves, the harder it becomes to hear that quiet inner voice beneath the constant noise of everyday life. Imagine standing before two identical doors. One represents everything you've always known. The other represents everything you could become. From the outside, they appear almost identical. The difference exists only in your willingness to walk through the unfamiliar one. According to this imaginative Arcturian narrative, this is why so many awakenings feel frightening before they feel liberating. Growth rarely begins with certainty. It begins with questions that cannot immediately be answered. It begins with letting go of identities that no longer fit. It begins with accepting that the person you were yesterday may not be the person you're becoming tomorrow. As this realization settles within you, something remarkable happens. The constant need for outside validation slowly begins to lose its grip. You stop asking everyone else who you should become and begin asking yourself instead. That single shift changes everything. Suddenly, your intuition feels stronger. Not because it predicts the future, but because you finally make space to hear it. You become more patient, more observant, more compassionate toward yourself and others. Problems that once seemed overwhelming become opportunities to learn. Fear still exists, but it no longer controls every decision you make. This is the first symbolic gift of the returning signal. Not secret knowledge, not supernatural power, but the courage to become more fully yourself. Yet the Arcturian story warns that this is only the beginning. Because once the signal has been recognized, it begins revealing truths that cannot be unseen. And what happens next will challenge everything you believed about the life you've been living.